Everybody, happy Monday. I hope you had a great weekend. As always, we'll do a quick update on community events and then do the questions of the week. So, just two events. Obviously, this Friday we have our March book club, and we're doing Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last, which I am, most of the way through. I should be able to finish it by Friday before our book club. So as always, please join. If you haven't had a chance to read the book, please join anyways. It's always good conversation, and you can always add a slightly different perspective. So look forward to seeing you there. And then for anybody who knows people that might be interested in kind of checking out the community, we do have our free webinar in the free community on Thursday evening. It's going to be on executive relationships, basically covering some of the core stuff that we have in our courses here, but obviously a much lighter version to give people an introduction into what we do here. So those are the two events we have coming up. So check them out. In terms of questions this week, I've got one, two, three. I've got five of them here. And we'll go through in the usual kind of form for the executive blueprint. So we'll start with the first one is around kind of the offer, right? Your value proposition. And the question is, in this case, what is the value of an executive MBA in terms of career growth? And I tend to get this question a lot. Either people have an executive MBA or they're getting one or they're considering getting one. And, what's the value, right? Why is this helpful? Should I get one? And the real answer is it is not particularly helpful as a credential, right? Just because you have an executive MBA does not really entitle you or sort of make you qualified for new and bigger jobs. It's not bad, right? There's no negative to having it. But is it worth, depending on what you're paying, tens of thousands of dollars? Not necessarily so much. And so what I usually say to people is, if your company's going to pay to send you to get some sort of executive MBA, absolutely do it. But the real important thing is what you learn there, right? So, that and the network that you get, right? So if you're in a good program, you get a network, that's awesome, right? You can always have more networks. And then in terms of the degree itself, it really is the knowledge, right? And that comes around to a lot of the financials. What's a P&L? What are margins? What are we trying to do when we actually talk about increasing revenue, reducing costs, reducing risk, those kind of value proposition things, because that's the nature of business, right? And if you're in your traditional execution role, right, you're focused on getting the project done, implementing the new technology, rolling out the new product, right? The senior executives are interested in, did that project reduce our costs? Did that new product sell? Are we making revenue? If we're making revenue, how does the expense compare? Are we actually making profit? Those are the things that the senior executives compare and think about. And so if you want to be a senior executive, you need to think like they do, right? And so doing an executive MBA, you learn a lot about these topics that are part of the executive toolkit of what you think about. So again, is the executive MBA going to magically open doors? Not necessarily. It is not a common thing that recruiters look for. That being said, if somebody's going to pay for it, it definitely doesn't hurt because it does say you've at least been educated on those things. But the proof is in the pudding in terms of what do you talk about and what are the results you have. So your day job and the questions you ask and your interactions and relationships you build will always trump whether or not you have that degree. So again, if you can get somebody to pay for it, or you can do it in a way that's self-education and not ridiculously expensive, I would say go do it. But I wouldn't necessarily invest a lot of money in an executive MBA formally because you think it's going to open doors. Because unfortunately, these days it just doesn't do that very often. Yeah, so that was the first question. Second one was around leads, and the specific question is, how should I answer a recruiter inquiry if I'm not super excited about the role? So hopefully by now you've sort of updated your LinkedIn. It's optimized using the stuff we have in the community. If you do that right, you should be getting recruiter calls. All right. That's the easiest way to find new opportunities because you didn't have to do anything, right? They called you. So what happens if they call you with a job that you're not super excited about? So there are two things here. One is it consistent? Is it consistently not at the right level? Right. And if it's consistently not at the right level, let's say you are a director looking for VP jobs and you get called for director jobs or even maybe senior manager jobs, that is an indication that your LinkedIn needs to be updated because you are attracting the wrong type of recruiters. So the first one is, are you attracting the right ones? If it is wrong consistently, that's a sign you want to go back and update your LinkedIn. But let's say, usually it's pretty good, but this one isn't so great. What should you do? I always recommend, unless it's totally out of the ballpark, is having a conversation with a recruiter. Because what you can do is one, make a new connection with a recruiter, which is always valuable. And two, you can actually mention what is it that is not resonating with you, because sometimes they have other positions that are more aligned with what you're trying to do. So whether it's a content, whether it's the location, travel, compensation, whatever it is, it's always useful to have one conversation with a recruiter to build a new connection, but also mention hopefully what you are excited about. Like, I really like the idea of this job. I like the company that it's associated with, but from my next role, I was looking for a bigger leadership jump. So the scope seems to be too small for what I'm currently looking for. Oh, well, that's good to know because this is a director role, but we're going to be posting the VP role in 2 weeks. Would you be interested in that? Okay, and now you actually found a role that might be interesting. So in general, unless it's totally out there and you're like, no, there's no way, it's the wrong sort of job for me, I would recommend you at least have that first conversation to, again, make the network connection and see if you can parlay that into a role that you might actually be interested in. Yeah. So that's about the leads. Okay, next one is more in the sales, right? So you've gotten the interview, you're trying to convince them to get you the role. And this is a classic one that I tend to get asked, which is, okay, so what do you say when they ask you, do you have any questions? Right? What are the questions that you should ask? And I'm always a big fan of, as we talk about in all the networking and interviewing courses, like, you want to put yourself in the job, right? The question is, can you solve their problem? Easiest way to figure out if you can solve their problem is to get them to think of you in their job. And if they could say, if I put Drew in this job, is he going to solve my problem? It seems like yes, I'm likely to give you an offer. So you want to do what you can to make them think of you in that role. And the way you can do that is asking questions like some of these, right? What would a successful first 90 days look like in this role, right? What are the most critical success factors in this role, right? What do you see as the biggest challenges to succeed in this role? You want to say, okay, if I got this job, what should I focus on? That's the direction of questions you want to ask, because once again, you're putting yourself in the role. You're thinking as if you got the job. You're thinking as if you're going to be there to solve the problem. And so if you ask the questions of, if I were to get this role, what are the critical things you would want me to accomplish in the first 90 days, right? And you can use that, if I were in this role, what would you want me to do? Immediately puts the interviewer has to think in their head. They're like, okay, well, if I put you in this role, what would I want you to do? In their head, they will put you in the role, right? Which is, again, moving them towards the outcome that we're trying to get. So those are the questions I would always focus on: immediate action, immediate value, first 90 days, biggest challenges, most critical things that get done. Those all serve the purpose of getting the interviewer to think of you in the role and how you would solve their problem, which is basically the whole idea of the interview. So that would be, the basic suggestion on what kind of question you should ask. Cool. Okay. Similarly, in the sales kind of interview question, anything extra I should think about for an internal job interview? And so I've had a couple of conversations with people in the last couple of weeks where they have an internal opportunity. There's another job that came up. They were either sort of suggested for it or they applied for it. And the main thing that I always want to kind of highlight when people do internal job interviews is be very careful not to become too familiar. Because what often happens is, the interviewer, they know you, right? And there's this risk that it becomes this kind of catch up conversation of, hey, Drew, good to see you. Yeah, good to see you too. Oh, how's it going? Great. So you're interviewing for this job. Yeah. And like, you assume that they kind of know you and they know what you can do, right? And if that happens, oftentimes you don't actually make your value pitch. You kind of keep the conversation up here. It's very friendly, but you never actually get into why you would be good for this role. And that's a mistake, because there are other candidates, there are other people you're getting sort of compared against. And if you're only focused on a good conversation, that's not the point. Again, the point is for them to see you as the most valuable person who can solve this problem. So again, when you're doing an internal role, even if you know the other people, prepare as if it were an external interview, right? You can be informal in the first minute. Hey, good to see you. Hope all is well. But then once they start asking questions, articulate the value, use the lead framework that we talk about. Make sure that you are treating this as a formal interview, because that can be a big turnoff. If somebody shows up and they're super casual, the takeaway from the interviewer internally is they're actually not that serious about this role. They kind of think they've got it, right? Because they think we're friends, so they think we're going to get it. It can be very sort of off-putting for the interviewer if that's not the case, right? If it is your best friend or you're somebody who's giving you jobs all the time, okay, fine. But most of the time, assume that you have to go through the same rigor that anybody else does. So don't treat it too casually. So that's my major piece that I would suggest in terms of internal job interviews. And the second one, which is related, is don't be too confident in your answers, right? And what I mean by that is if you're in group A and the job's in group B, don't come across as, oh, I know all the problems in group B. Yeah, everybody says you guys are difficult to work with, the process is messed up, and don't worry, I'll fix it, right? Coming across as sort of judgmental and knowing the answer, even if you're not in that group, can also be very off-putting. Again, you would never do that on a company that was external, but because it's internal, you may actually know the problems. That might be true, but don't assume you know everything, right? Well, based on my interactions with this group, it seems like timeliness and quality of the responses is some area that we would need to work on, right? It seems like from my experience, using phrases like that will soften a little bit because even if you quote unquote know the problem, you don't want to say that, right? Because they may take offense. They might be like, you don't know the whole situation. Your group's actually the one that's like, you can imagine where this would go south, right? So again, internally, don't get too familiar and don't know the answer. Don't come in with a prescribed answer because the reality is you don't know everything that's going on. And so you want to have an open mind. So again, two things that oftentimes you would not have to worry about externally, but you do have to worry about internally. So if you have an internal interview, keep those two things in mind. Okay, and then just one other question for this week, and this one is around executive presence. And the question is one big idea good enough to be seen as strategic? And so if we zoom out and we think about executive presence, one of the aspects is, are you an idea generator? Can you create a vision? Are you strategic? And so the question is, if I have one really good idea, is that enough? And while it's much better than not, right? If you don't have anything, one good idea is good. And so I don't want to say anything negative about that. But to say, do I just need one? I would say no, right? One idea, however big it is not going to set you up as a strategic thinker. It's just not enough. And so what you want to think about is a funnel of ideas. So rather having a big idea and then trying to do it. And if it goes great, then you're done. If not, it dies and you kind of continue. Have a funnel of ideas at different stages of maturity. Here's a very rough idea. Here's an idea that could happen. Here's a project that I'm actually proposing. Here's the thing I'm going to the board next week to try to get money for, right? You want a proposal and you want a bunch of things in each one. And it's a classic kind of idea funnel or, a sales funnel for your idea. So you have more rough ideas than you do sort of mature ones. And this is where you start to become a strategic thinker is because you have many ideas at different stages of maturity. So, AI, what are your thoughts around AI? It's not something you necessarily might be doing immediately. It might be a long-term play, but where are your ideas, right? Hey, over the next few years, as AI matures, I'm thinking we could potentially use it in this space. What do you think, fellow executive? Like, what do you think, right? No, that could be interesting. Like we have to wait, for this maturity curve to happen. Good, that's what I was thinking. So maybe we could think about it as part of our 2026 planning. Okay, so that's a long-term idea versus, hey, I have this idea. It doesn't cost a lot of money. I think we can automate this process and save $50,000, and I think we can do it in 2 weeks. What do you think? Can we do that? Sure, get the money, do it. That's a very short-term idea. But you want to have a portfolio of ideas. And that's, the idea itself is not necessarily what gets you thought of as a strategic thinker. It is the consistency with which you bring new ideas. Now, if you bring new ideas and none of them ever happen, okay, that's not good either. So you want to make sure at least one or two get all the way to the end of the funnel and get executed. But to become a strategic thinker, it's more important to consistently over time come up with a number of ideas. So when I think about you, I think about all the different ideas you brought up over time, not that one idea that you had, right? So is one idea enough? Not in the long term. It's a great start. If you have an idea, absolutely go through it. But if you want to be seen as a strategic thinker as part of building your executive presence, you want to think about it as an idea portfolio and funnel so that you've got a number of them in different stages of maturity and you're constantly adding new ones. And that's just part of what you do in your normal course of business. All right. So those were the questions for this week. Just a reminder, we got the book club this Friday, so look forward to seeing you there. And as always, just if you have any questions, just DM me or you can drop it below in this post, and I will answer them for next week. All right. Have a great week, everybody. We'll talk soon. All right. See ya.